microphone wire. Pesky microphones. Thank you, Hillary. Not our normal attire around here. Can you take me seriously while I'm wearing this? But not too seriously. I like it. It's colorful and festive and all of that. If you were watching the ordination service on July 1st, you might have seen that when it was first put on my shoulders, the back corner was popped up, kind of like James Dean style, which I was good with that, but one of my fellow ordinands quickly fixed it, and so it's kind of disappointing to not be able to wear it like that. Sometimes you have to conform, I suppose. Not too much. So we're in a sermon series that's called Bless. Bless is an acronym that is, it's a part of a system that was developed by our denomination, the Covenant, to help with understanding and doing evangelism. So it stands for Begin with Prayer. We've had a couple of sermons on that. The next one is Listen with Care, which is where we are today. The E is Eat Together. The first S is Serve with Love, and the second S is Share Your Stories. So it's a good outline. But I want to ask you, what is evangelism? Pay attention to your own answers to that question in your mind. What do you think evangelism is? Probably you have a few different answers that come to mind. Maybe based on various experiences that you've had with evangelism, either receiving it or giving it. So I have another question for you. Does it mostly have a positive connotation or negative? 51% positive, maybe? Or not so much? Why do we do it? Why do we do evangelism? Do we want people to join our club? Hopefully not. I mean, I think the simplest answer, and probably the best answer, is because Jesus told us to. But in our attempts to figure out how to do what he said, I think we've created some kind of misshapen applications of that, of evangelism. Some of you maybe have been part of evangelism training where you were coached to make your testimony into an elevator pitch. Like really tighten up your testimony so that you could be ready at any time to give that testimony. Well, when I look at the Great Commission, which is where Jesus very clearly said, what? Go into all the world and what? Make disciples. Not give elevator pitches. Okay, so make disciples, what does that mean? It's not like assembly line, we'll stamp them out, right? It's connect with people. Do life with people. Be a disciple and bring people along that can learn how to be disciples. Even that verse in 1 Peter, 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you to explain the hope that's in you. Actually, I think that verse might have been used by one of the programs that was encouraging me to make an elevator pitch testimony, because always be ready to give an answer. Thing is, though, the Greek word is apologia, for the giving of an answer. And it's really what the philosophers did. It wasn't quick. And it included relationship. It included personal encounter. And the other thing about that verse, it says, everyone who asks you. So it's not really like just blurting out the gospel or your condensed version of it unprovoked. It's like someone's asking. And when would someone possibly ask you to explain the hope that's in you? Not like passing you in the hallway, right? I mean, if somebody's going to ask you a question like that, you're going to have had coffee together. You're going to have maybe, taken a hike together. It's somebody you're doing life with, at least to some degree, right? So, I think it's important to bear these things in mind as we start to unpack this idea of listening with care. Because I think it's really important for us to not assume that because our denomination has the word evangelical in it, it means, well, I guess we're supposed to evangelize, and we're going to have one of these sermon series every year or two, and then we'll feel bad because we don't do it, but we'll get over it and we'll forget about we need to know, we just need to think about, what does this word mean? What does it mean to us in real life? How can we get a better handle on actually following Jesus and how he did it? Okay. Today's passage is in the Gospel of Luke. Gospels are a particular kind of book in the New Testament. We've got 4 of them. Luke is the 3rd in the order. And these contain the words and the actions of Jesus. They're pictures of the life of Jesus, especially his ministry, his death and resurrection and ascension. We are looking at a passage that talks about a blind man who's begging along the side of the road on the way into Jericho. Right before that, we're going to read that passage together in a couple of minutes, but right before it, the setup for it is that Jesus says to the disciples, we're going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to get into a whole lot of trouble. And they don't know what he's talking about. I mean, he actually comes out and says, they'll arrest me and kill me. They cannot see what he's talking about. But you have to imagine that they're troubled by it. Well, the next scene, they're not in Jerusalem. They're stopping in Jericho. Reason being, Jericho was a smaller town on the way to Jerusalem. It was low altitude. Lots of streams flowed into it. So probably it was a great place to stop and hydrate on your way to Jerusalem. So that's why there's this cut in the action where Jesus says, we're going to Jerusalem, but now we're looking at Jericho. All right. So I want to pray, and then we will read this passage together. Creator God, maker of everything, and lover of persons, we want to see. We want to receive our sight. as we open your word together, open our eyes for your glory and for your delight. Amen. Okay, Luke 18, 35 to 43. Let's read together. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. He called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? Lord, I want to see, he replied. Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. This is the word of the Lord. So as I said, there are 4 books in the New Testament that we refer to as Gospels. 2 months ago, while we were in the Miracles of Jesus sermon series, Pastor Britta brought a sermon on the same story, but from a different gospel. And in it, we find out that this blind man, was named Bartimaeus. And one of the things that Pastor Britta pointed out was that broken things make noise. And if you remember, she gave us an illustration of getting that shopping cart that has a sideways wheel or something, and it just, makes all the noise. So this is that same story. Before we look at the blind man and his yelling, I just want to point out that Jesus connects. There's a Greek word in this passage that is engidzo. It's translated as approach or draw near. It also means to connect. It also means joining one thing to another. So it appears in the very first verse, which is Jesus approached Jericho. That's engidzo, connect. Jesus is on the move to connect with Jericho. Maybe the disciples are thinking it'll be a good place to sit down and get a drink of water. Jesus is connecting. This word engidzo appears one other time in this story. Can you think of where that might be? It's a little later on. When Jesus stops, he stands still and he asks for the blind man to be brought to him because he has heard him in the crowd. He has heard him. He stands still. Bring him to me. And as the man drew near, engidzo, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? So 2 places this word connect. Jesus is on the move to connect with Jericho. Jesus stops and stands still to connect with the blind man. So this blind man, he's stuck. There's really nothing he can do except sit by the roadside and beg every day. But I love this guy because he's not okay with that. He has not resigned himself to that version of his identity. And when he hears that Jesus is passing by, he seizes the moment. And he causes a disruption. This is a word for you, my friends. If you are stuck, and if you are not okay with the current version of your identity and your situation, disrupt. Disrupt. Okay, what happens next? There are people who do not like that disruption. There are people who do not appreciate that disruption. And what do? They rebuke him. They rebuke him. You can be ready for that too. And they try to silence him. They want to cancel the man. They tell him to shut up. So I think maybe they're so keyed in on the disruption itself that they can't see the person. They're rebuking the disruption. They're trying to silence this inconvenience, this diversion. Okay? There's something very sobering about that verse that talks about the people rebuking and silencing. I had not noticed it before. Do you know who did that? Do you know who did that? Those who led the way. Who do you suppose led the way? It had to be the disciples, right? They're with Jesus. He's just, he's traveling with them. Who else would be leading the way? But even if it isn't the disciples, it's somebody who's leading. The leadership is rebuking and silencing this person who wants a new life. The leadership is rebuking and silencing someone who is about to be one of them. He's about to be one of them. This is a soon-to-be disciple. Because the first thing he does after Jesus restores his sight is he follows Jesus. This is a disciple in waiting, and they are rebuking and silencing because they're keying in on the disruption and not the person. Thank God. Jesus heard the person, and he stood still, and he connected with the man. There's a difference between stillness and stuckness. Amen? There's a difference between stillness and stasis. We can go up to the next one, Daryl. Yeah, we're past agenda now. Sorry, I didn't use the word, so I threw Daryl off. It was the leaders had an agenda. They had a plan, they had a program, and that's what they were about. And this disruption from the blind man was interfering with that. We need to hold these things loosely, friends. We need to hold our agendas loosely. So again, stillness versus stuckness. Stillness is not the same as stasis. So the blind man looks stuck initially, right? But he refuses to give in to that, to surrender to that. And Jesus, all of the momentum is going into Jericho, and he stops. I just love the way that Luke writes this story down, because it seems to me that it's like you can just picture it. It's like cinematic in a way, right? All of this yelling and moving and momentum, and Jesus stops. Boom. But he's not stuck. He's connecting with a person, and he's about to bring sight to this person. In the process, he's bringing sight to the ones who rebuked and silenced. There's grace for them too. There's mercy for them because they get to see. This is what Jesus is doing. All right, so again, Jesus does evangelism person to person. Person to person. God is a person. You are a person. Anyone that you're going to bless is a person. This is the way. This is what we can follow. We want to follow Jesus in doing evangelism person to person, in connecting. We need to connect. Yeah, I mentioned that 1 Peter verse. Always be ready to give a reason for the hope to anyone who asks, everyone who asks, the hope that's in you. If you push into the next verse, it talks about, but always with gentleness and respect. The word that's translated gentleness there is just, it's a lovely word. It's all about presence and kindness and compassion and tenderness and all of these things. The word that's translated as respect means fear. It's awe. It's reverence. See, we're supposed to be giving the reason for the hope that's in us to a person that we're connecting with, and we're seeing the image of God in that person. We're seeing this might be a disciple. Awe. Reverence. Nothing to do with dehumanizing or depersonalizing. This is opposite. Listening with care is opposite. It's being there with all of the kindness and all of the reverence for this human being that you have the privilege of being able to talk with about these things. Okay. It's a heart thing. Listening with care. It's a heart thing. Did you ever realize that heart has ear right in the middle of it? Go ahead, Daryl. Heart has ear right in the middle of it. Now, I'm not looking to that side of the room right now because I know that my wife is saying to me, seriously? That could be the most cornball thing you've ever said in your life. That is downright Hallmarkian. I'm defenseless. It's cheesy. It is cheesy. But if it gives you a handle on what we're talking about when we say listen with care, then I'll wear it. Okay, it's time for communion. Because we got to get personal. We got to get personal. Whatever evangelism is, it doesn't make any sense at all if it's not personal. It doesn't make any sense at all if it's not based on your own personal relationship with Jesus. And that's not maybe as high a bar as you might think. You know, I talked about the Great Commission, Matthew 28, Jesus saying, go into all the world and make disciples. If you read a couple verses before that, the 11, because Judas was gone by now, and Matthias had not been chosen yet. So the 11 go to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. They see him, and they worship him. But some doubted. And the Greek word, another way to translate it is hesitated. We're talking about the 11 here, right? We're talking about that inner circle of disciples, and some of them doubted. Some of them hesitated. Is that not a glorious blessing? That Jesus then said, to them included, go into all the world and make disciples. So you may feel today as though your personal relationship with Jesus, if you have even identified that as something that you want, you may feel that it's kind of flimsy and threadbare, and you don't have a great hold on it. Bless you. Bless you. You're invited. You're welcome. So as we gather